The Bible and Archaeology, The Great Civilizations of the Past. Part 2, Egypt. Episode 4, The Exodus Enigma, Solving the Chronological Puzzle. In this new episode, we delve into one of the most transcendental biblical accounts, directly linked to the emergence of a new nation and its humble origins, narrated by the protagonists themselves. These events not only transformed the history of humanity, but also left a lasting legacy that has contributed to the formation of the foundations of today's society. We travel back to a time when humans aspired to honors reserved for deities, a time when the effort to gain the approval and blessing of the gods resulted in the creation of impressive monuments, some of which have withstood the test of time and endure to this day. In this era, decisions of national importance were made with the blessing of the gods, reflecting a deep connection between the divine and the earthly. However, it was also a period when many of these beliefs were shown to be mere fallacies, now deciphered through hieroglyphs carved into rock thousands of years ago and exposed to the curiosity of modern man. All this and more is the biblical Exodus. Discover which historical evidence we can relate to this distant event. Stay until the end and don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to not miss more content like this. In our previous episode, Joseph in Egypt, Simple Myth or Historical Fact. We delved into the time when Jacob, Joseph's father, and his family settled in Egypt to survive a famine that caused great hunger in the region. Thanks to biblical chronology, we have been able to establish that this occurred in 1728 BC. In the same documentary, we were able to verify that this date aligns with some surprising evidence, placing Semitic peoples in Egypt during that period, such as the Brooklyn Papyrus, the Turin Canon, and the excavations carried out in Avaris by Manfred Beatak. Everything points to the period of Hyksos domination mentioned by Manetho, an Egyptian priest and historian of the 3rd century BC. For more information, you can go to our channel Mankind Roots, where you will find the video Joseph in Egypt, Simple Myth or Historical Fact. From those distant events, 135 years pass and we arrive at 1593 BC, the date of Moses' birth. According to the biblical account, Moses was born in Egypt. He was the son of Amram, grandson of Kohath, and great-grandson of Levi. His mother Jochebed was Kohath's sister. Moses was 3 years younger than his brother Aaron, while his sister Miriam was a few years older than them. We find a detailed account of the Exodus in the biblical book that bears the same name. It is the second book of the Hebrew Aramaic scriptures, commonly called the Old Testament or the Torah for the Hebrews, and is part of what biblical scholars know as the Pentateuch, that is, the first 5 books of the Bible, which Moses himself wrote in the desert, probably in 1513 BC. Therefore, while the events contained in the book of Genesis are a collection that for Moses were part of the history of his ancestors, intertwined with the history of humanity, in the book of Exodus, Moses writes as an eyewitness, putting in writing, according to divine command, everything that he himself experienced along with the people of Israel. The book of Exodus begins with a description of the growth and multiplication of the Israelites in Egypt. The Pharaoh, fearful of their increasing number, subjects them to forced labor and orders the killing of all male Hebrew babies. Moses, a Hebrew baby saved from death, is adopted by Pharaoh's daughter and raised in the Egyptian court. When Moses is an adult, he witnesses the cruelty of the treatment of his Hebrew brothers and kills an Egyptian in their defense. He flees to Midian, where he marries and lives as a shepherd. One day, while tending his father-in-law Jethro's flock, God appears to Moses in a burning bush and commands him to return to Egypt to free the Israelites. God reveals himself and promises Moses that he will free his people from slavery. Moses returns to Egypt and confronts Pharaoh, demanding the release of the Israelites. Pharaoh refuses, which unleashes a series of 10 devastating plagues that God sends upon Egypt. Before the 10th plague, God instructs Moses about the celebration of the Passover, a feast in which the Israelites sacrifice a lamb and mark their doors with its blood so that the angel of death will pass over their homes. The 10th plague kills all the firstborn of Egypt, including Pharaoh's son. Terrified, Pharaoh finally allows the Israelites to leave. The Israelites, led by Moses, leave Egypt in a great multitude. taking their possessions with them. Pharaoh regrets having let them go and pursues them with his army. God miraculously divides the waters of the Red Sea, allowing the Israelites to cross safely. When the Egyptian army tries to follow them, the waters close over them and they drown. After their miraculous liberation, the Israelites travel through the desert toward the Promised Land. On Mount Sinai, God gives Moses the 10 Commandments, the moral and legal code that will guide the people of Israel. God also gives Moses detailed instructions for the construction of the tabernacle, a portable sanctuary where his presence will be manifested. During their journey through the desert, the Israelites face various trials and difficulties, including lack of water and food, and the temptation to worship other gods. Moses intercedes for the people before God, and God provides them with manna and quails to eat, and water from the rock. Despite God's provisions, the people complain and rebel against Moses and Aaron. God punishes their lack of faith and makes them wander in the desert for 40 years. At the end of the book of Exodus, the construction of the tabernacle is completed, and the glory of God fills it. Moses appoints his successor, Joshua, and God gives additional instructions to the people before they enter the Promised Land. Exodus is a fundamental book in the history and religion of the Jewish people. It recounts the story of their liberation from slavery, the formation of their identity as a nation, and their relationship with God. It also introduces important themes that will be explored in the rest of the Bible, such as the sovereignty of God, the importance of obedience, and the promise of redemption. A fundamental aspect of seeking historical evidence of the Exodus is to place these events in the correct historical context. Classical history, based on some indications from the biblical account, Egyptian chronologies, and other documents, proposes different dates, which can vary by more than 300 to 200 years. For example, for a long time, classical history has proposed that Ramses II could have been the pharaoh ruling at the time of the Exodus, a theory based in turn on inscriptions by Ramses II, in which he claims to have built with slaves the city that bears his name, Per-Ramses, which means House of Ramses, a name cited in the biblical account simply as Ramses, concluding that the Exodus would have occurred in the 13th century BC, a period in which Egyptian chronology places the reign of Ramses II. It seems that during the time of Ramses II, the capital was Per-Ramses, while the biblical Ramses was only a storage place. It is generally recognized that Ramses II attributed certain achievements to his predecessors, so it is possible that, at most, he only rebuilt or expanded Per-Ramses. Additionally, since the name Ramses was already used in the time of Joseph in the 18th century BC, there is no reason to assume that giving that name to a city had to be directly related to Ramses II. To conclude, it should be noted that its very meaning makes it likely that it was a popular name among the ancient Egyptians. During the reign of Ramses II, there were already several cities bearing that name. Therefore, the mere coincidence that the city is mentioned in the Bible and that slaves participated in the construction work does not constitute solid evidence to establish that Ramses II was the pharaoh of Egypt at the time of the biblical Exodus. The Exodus has also been linked to Pharaoh Merneptah because he mentions the people of Israel in the stele that bears his name, also called the Victory Stele or the Israel Stele, in which he commemorates his victory over Canaan around 1210 BC. This document, rather than proving that the Exodus occurred in that era, proves that by that time Israel was already established in Canaan and had become a nation of some importance in the region, worthy of being mentioned among his conquests. Biblical chronology and secular history have been the subject of debate, with many attempting to harmonize the biblical account with the chronology of ancient secular documents. The truth, adjusted to facts and realities, requires that these secular documents be unequivocally accurate and consistent to be a precise standard of judgment. Critics often give less credence to biblical chronology than to that of extinct nations, leading to the examination of ancient documents of nations related to biblical events. The Bible stands out as the historical book par excellence, while other historical records such as the Egyptian, Assyrian, and Babylonian are incomplete and mystical. The Sumerian king list, for example, presents reigns of thousands of years, which is clearly mystical. Extra-biblical information has been obtained by piecing together data from monuments, tablets, and later writings of classical historiographers. Although many tablets and papyri have been recovered, most are religious texts or commercial documents, with few historical writings that glorify emperors and their military campaigns. The historical content of the Bible, spanning about 4,000 years, is detailed and coherent, recording events from the beginning of mankind to the time of Nehemiah. The Bible presents a graphic and objective account of the nation of Israel, speaking honestly about its strengths and weaknesses. The biblical chroniclers had detailed records at their disposal, as evidenced in the books of Kings and Chronicles, and cite numerous books and official records demonstrating careful investigation and complete documentation. This is demonstrated by the extensive genealogies composed of hundreds of names that they were able to compile, as well as the objective and well-linked presentation of the reigns of each of the kings of Judah and Israel, and the relationship of these reigns with each other and with those of other nations. Modern historians still have doubts about the succession of certain Assyrian and Babylonian kings, even some belonging to the last dynasties. However, there is no such uncertainty regarding the kings of Judah and Israel. The observance of Sabbath years and Jubilee helped maintain an accurate record of the passage of years. The sense of time in the Bible, encompassing the past, present, and future, is another distinctive factor. Biblical prophecies often implied specific periods of time, making chronological accuracy a matter of great importance. Although some extra-biblical documents are older than the manuscript copies of the Bible, their content is of much inferior quality, contaminated by mysticism and political propaganda. The coherence and reliability of biblical chronology are easily distinguished when compared with other extra-biblical sources. The writer on archaeological subjects C.W. Saram notes that secular historical records are weak, confused, or erroneous, and have reached us in a fragmentary and half-erased manner by time. Saram describes chronological history as a purely hypothetical structure, comparing it to a chronological skeleton with very little around it. Secular chronology deserves trust only when it agrees with the biblical record. The apparent discrepancies in extra-biblical records may be due to the inability of modern historians to correctly interpret ancient methods. There is much evidence of carelessness, inaccuracy, and even deliberate falsification by historians and chronologists. In conclusion, biblical chronology is more reliable than classical history and archaeology. The Bible offers a detailed, coherent, and objective account. Evidence of this is the many references that biblical chronology provides to establish the historical date of the biblical Exodus, as we will see next. The 400 years of affliction. Approximately in the year 1933 BC, God, after having assured Abraham that his descendants would take possession of Canaan, declares the following in Genesis 15, verses 13 and 14. Then he said to Abram, "Know for certain that your offspring will be foreigners in a land not theirs, and that the people there will enslave them and afflict them for 400 years. But I will judge the nation they will serve, and after that they will go out with many goods." In this prophecy, the 400 years in which Abraham's descendants would be mistreated are distinguished, and when the 400 years ended, his descendants would be liberated. When do the 400 years begin and end? When Abraham was 100 years old, his son Isaac was born. Using the biblical genealogies, we can establish that Abraham was born in the year 2018 BC. Therefore, his son Isaac was born in 1918 BC. 14 years earlier, Ishmael, whom Abraham had with his Egyptian slave Hagar, was born. Ishmael, evidently out of jealousy and self-interest with the birth of Isaac, lost his right as the firstborn and mistreated his half-brother Isaac. The conflict between Ishmael and Isaac, which began when Isaac was only 5 years old, marked the beginning of a long series of afflictions for Abraham's descendants. This situation began to occur when Ishmael was 19 years old and Isaac was 5 years old. Therefore, this began to happen in the year 1913 BC. From 1913 BC onward, Abraham's descendants faced persecution and difficulties in Canaan, culminating in slavery in Egypt. Therefore, the 400 years predicted in Genesis 15 verses 13 and 14 began in 1913 BC and ended in the year 1513 BC, fulfilling the end of the affliction with the liberation of Abraham's descendants from Egypt, the 430 years. Another way to calculate the date when the Hebrews left Egypt is through the text of Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 to 42. The dwelling of the Israelites who had dwelled in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, on this very day, all the multitudes of Jehovah went out of the land of Egypt. It is a night on which they will celebrate Jehovah's bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This night is to be observed to Jehovah by all the people of Israel throughout their generations. Comments on this text from Exodus 12:40 clarify that in Hebrew the verb had dwelt is in the plural, suggesting that it may refer to the sons of Israel rather than to the dwelling. The Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch render Exodus 12:40 in such a way as to include both the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, indicating that the period of 430 years is not limited only to the time that the Israelites lived in Egypt. The Septuagint says, "But the sojourning of the children of Israel, which they sojourned in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, was 430 years." The Samaritan Pentateuch mentions, "in the land of Canaan and in the land of Egypt." When did the 430 years begin and end? The Apostle Paul in Galatians chapter 3 explains that this period of 430 years began when Abraham, fulfilling the divine command from his residence in northern Syria, in the region of Haran, moved to Canaan, and that the 430 years would end with the Exodus. The biblical account records that Abraham left Haran when he was 75 years old. If Abraham was born in 2018 BC, this event must have occurred in 1943 BC, the year when the 430 years began. Other biblical references allow us to establish the number of years in which Abraham's descendants lived in Canaan before moving to Egypt. As we have seen, Abraham's son Isaac was born when his father was 100 years old in 1918 BC. Isaac was 60 years old when his son Jacob was born, along with his twin Esau. This happened in 1858 BC. Genesis in chapter 47, verse 9, informs us that Jacob was 130 years old when he arrived in Egypt, which surprised Pharaoh. This fact places us in the year 1728 BC, the year when the dwelling of Abraham's descendants in Egypt began. Therefore, we can establish that the period of 430 years indicated in Exodus 12:40 begins in the year 1943 BC and concludes in 1513 BC, of which Abraham's descendants dwelt 215 years in Canaan and 215 years in Egypt, from the 14th of the lunar month of Abib, later called Nisan, of 1728 BC, to the 14th of Nisan of 1513 BC, the date on which the Jewish Passover continues to be celebrated to this day. The building of Solomon's Temple. Another biblical reference that allows us to establish the date of the Exodus is found in the first book of Kings in chapter 6, verse 1, where it says, "In the 480th year, after the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year after Solomon became king over Israel, in the month of Ziv, that is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of Jehovah." Thanks to the chronology and detailed sequence of the kings of Judah and Israel contained in the Bible, it is established that the 4th year of King Solomon's rule corresponds to 1034 BC. Therefore, if we go back from that year 480 years, as the text of 1 Kings refers, we arrive at the year 1514, 1513 BC, the 450 years. These biblical chronological investigations were already noted by Christians in the 1st century, as noted in the speech that the Apostle Paul delivers in Acts chapter 13, verses 17 to 20. "The God of this people Israel chose our forefathers, and he exalted the people while they lived as foreigners in the land of Egypt, and brought them out of it with an uplifted arm. And for a period of about 40 years he put up with them in the wilderness. After destroying 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he assigned their land as an inheritance. All of that was during about 450 years. When do the 450 years mentioned by the Apostle Paul begin and end? First of all, Paul speaks of when God chose our fathers. God chose the fathers of the Jews when it became clear that this line of descent would pass through Isaac and through no other son of Abraham. As we have already been able to establish, this happened in the year 1918 BC with the birth of Isaac. According to the Apostle Paul, from the birth of Isaac until they left Egypt and received the Promised Land as an inheritance, 450 years passed. Thus, we arrive at the year 1467 BC, that is 46 years after the Exodus from Egypt in 1513 BC. These 46 years correspond to the 40 years that the people of Israel wandered in the desert and 6 years in which they conquered the land of Canaan, as indicated in Joshua chapter 14, verse 7. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of Jehovah, sent me out of Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I returned with a forthright report. After this episode, 40 years passed in the desert, and about 6 years to conquer the Promised Land, as indicated in verse 10. Now, just as he promised, Jehovah has preserved me alive these 45 years since Jehovah made this promise to Moses when Israel walked in the wilderness. I am still here today, 85 years old. In various biblical contexts throughout different historical periods, and with the contribution of various historical personalities, there is agreement in establishing the date of the Exodus in the year 1513 BC. Then why does classical history not take into account the biblical references to establish the date of the Exodus? It is possible that by considering the biblical text solely as a treatise on faith and religious beliefs, its historical value is underestimated, dismissing the information it contains without the seriousness it deserves. However, if this were the case, the coherence and honesty of any rigorous researcher should prevent them from applying this criterion selectively. Throughout history, humans have expressed their inclination towards spirituality in various ways. It is an undeniable fact that all ancient civilizations were imbued with mystical and fantastic tales. Some of these tales probably originated in real events that, over time, were distorted by popular imagination. Others, however, arose from pure invention, and many of them would be rejected outright by modern culture. When comparing the content of the Bible with the remnants of the tales of ancient civilizations of its time, it is impossible to ignore the coherence and reliability of the historical record it offers. Unlike other texts, the Bible presents the facts frankly and honestly, free from the political propaganda of the rulers of the time and exempt from the excessive mysticism that characterized the religious systems of antiquity. Its clarity and transparency make it a unique and valuable testimony for understanding the past. In this documentary, we have explored how the historical references present in the Bible allow us to determine the date of the exodus of the people of Israel from Egypt. From this key date, we could identify the Pharaoh with whom Moses negotiated the liberation of his people. In our next episode, we will cross-reference the dates provided by the biblical text with the historical records of the reigns of the pharaohs, with the aim of discovering the identity of the Pharaoh of the Exodus. What did the archaeological evidence of that time reveal? Were there really 10 plagues? These and other questions will be addressed in our next documentary. Don't miss it. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue exploring fascinating content like this. We'll be waiting for you.